Laudetur Jesus Christus. Vatican and World News.
In the headlines this Monday, January the 11th, we shine the spotlight on an Italian television interview in which Pope Francis shares his views on the pandemic, faith, vaccinations, and a range of other issues. The Holy See's permanent observer to the United Nations in New York reflects on the connection between the pandemic, the economy, and the environment. And world leaders gather at a virtual summit to reignite international advocacy for the environment and biodiversity. In the Vatican, I'm Linda Bordoni. Pope Francis is inviting everyone to rediscover our common unity, to be close to those who suffer, to feel like brothers and sisters in order to overcome together the global crisis caused by the pandemic. The Pope elaborated on this during an interview to Italy's Canale 5 TV channel, which was aired Sunday evening. During the interview, the Pope also spoke of issues ranging from the pandemic to the defence of life and the weak, the value of unity in politics and in the Church, vaccinations, and the need to rediscover the value of faith as a gift from God. Robin Gomes has more.
Pope Francis begins his interview pointing out that after a crisis we are never the same. Either we emerge better or we come out worse. Citing dramatic situations such as children going hungry or without schools and the wars that upset many areas of the planet, the Pope says that our exit out of the crisis will result in defeat if we don't address these issues. Turning to his favorite theme of fraternity, the Pope says the challenge is to draw close to others, their situation and problems. The culture of indifference or the couldn't-care-less attitude to problems, he says, destroys and kills because it distances us. Instead, the key word out of the crisis should be closeness, especially for politicians and religious leaders. Pope Francis noted that the pandemic has exacerbated the throwaway culture against the weakest members of society, including the unborn. The problem of abortion, he pointed out, is primarily a human problem, one of ethics, before becoming a religious issue. It's not right, he says, to solve a problem by ending human life. On the question of vaccinating oneself against the coronavirus, the Pope says it is not an option. It is an ethical action because you are playing not only with your health and life, but also with the lives of others. For a period, he says, the I should be replaced with the we. Either we are all saved together or no one is saved, the Pope says, adding he has booked himself for vaccination, which is starting shortly in the Vatican. Regarding his reaction to the assault on Capitol Hill in the United States on 6 January, Pope Francis admits he was astonished considering the discipline of the people of the nation and the maturity of its democracy. However, he notes that even in the most mature society, there is always something wrong when there are people who take a path against the community, against democracy and the common good. Pope Francis condemned the violence, saying, we must reflect and understand well in order not to repeat and to learn from history. I am Robin Gomes.
Health, work and the environment are three of the main problems that this pandemic has brought to light. This is according to Archbishop Gabriele Caccia, the Holy See's permanent observer to the UN in New York. Speaking to Vatican News just after having been received in the Vatican in audience by Pope Francis, Archbishop Caccia reflected on the connections between the pandemic, the economy and the environment.
During this pandemic, we have seen different problems. The health problem, to solve it, was decided to lock down. The lockdown made another problem for the living of the people, the economy. It blocked the normal developing of things. On the other hand, the climate had a kind of moment of hope because less pollution. So we see, for instance, three important issues: health, work, environment, that at the moment are in competition among themselves. If you save health, you lose work. If you save work, you lose environment. The challenge ahead of us is to be able to make these three exigencies that are real work together so they can be implemented. One with the other, not one against the other. This is the challenge that we are focused to think about for the future.
That was Archbishop Gabriele Caccia, the Holy See's permanent observer to the United Nations in New York. Protecting the world's biodiversity is on the agenda today for world leaders at the One Planet Summit, held in virtual format due to the coronavirus pandemic. The one-day summit will focus on 4 major topics: protecting terrestrial and marine ecosystems, promoting agroecology, a more sustainable way to grow food, increasing funding to protect biodiversity, and identifying links between deforestation and the health of humans and animals. About 30 leaders, government officials, and heads of international organizations are attending. I spoke to Thomas Insua, Executive Director of the Global Catholic Climate Movement, and asked him what he hopes to see come out of the summit.
I think it's interesting that today's summit by Macron and the UN is connecting the dots between the biodiversity crisis and the climate crisis, that they're two deeply interrelated crises, that we cannot solve one without solving the other one. So this is the first time that an intentional effort is done to connect those dots. It's worth noting that there's a biodiversity summit, COP15, happening in China later this year, which is supposed to be kind of what the Paris Agreement was for climate, a similar agreement for biodiversity. So hoping that we'll understand the severity of these two crises and tackle them together as they need to be tackled.
What you're saying brings to mind Pope Francis's prophetic words recently, "No one is saved alone."
Yes, indeed. That's totally applicable to so many global crises, and the environmental crises are no exception. So nobody's saved alone. We're all in the same boat. Our planet, our beloved planet, our common home is this boat. We're literally a boat in the universe, in the vast expanses of the universe. We're all together in this tiny boat, very fragile one. And we have to care for it really hard, because if we lose the boat, we are all lost as well. Human and non-human creatures inhabiting this planet.
And that was Thomas Insua, Executive Director of the Global Catholic Climate Movement. A United States woman is due to be put to death on Tuesday after an appeals court in the United States lifted a stay of execution. Lydia O'Kane reports.
It's been 70 years since a female federal inmate was executed in the United States, but on Tuesday, 52-year-old Lisa Montgomery is due to be put to death by lethal injection at the United States Penitentiary, Terre Haute, in Indiana. In 2004, Montgomery killed 23-year-old pregnant woman Bobby Jo Stinnett at her home in Missouri before cutting out and kidnapping her baby. The baby was recovered and later returned to her father. At her trial in 2007, a jury found her guilty of federal kidnapping resulting in death. It also unanimously recommended a death sentence. Experts who examined Montgomery after her conviction were of the opinion that by the time of her crime, she had been living with psychosis, bipolar disorder, and post-traumatic stress disorders. Her lawyers also argue that she is mentally unwell and should not face the death penalty. Lisa Montgomery is one of 55 women currently on death row in the United States. This latest execution comes just days before President-elect Joe Biden takes office. President Donald Trump is the first U.S. president to resume federal executions in nearly 2 decades. Bishops in the U.S. have continued to call for an end to the death penalty, as the government has continued to ramp up the pace of federal executions in the last days of the Trump presidency. A recent statement released by U.S. Bishops' Conference Committee Chairman on Pro-Life Activities, Archbishop Joseph Naumann of Kansas City, and Archbishop Coakley called for an end to the execution, saying the decision not to execute someone, even someone who has done something terrible, is not soft on crime, rather it is strong on the dignity of life. I'm Lydia O'Kane.
In Kyrgyzstan, the winner of weekend presidential elections promised today to push for quick constitutional changes to strengthen the powers of the presidency. Election officials said that with 98% of the ballots counted, Sadir Zaparov was winning with 79% of the vote. His victory comes just over 3 months after he was freed from jail by throngs of protesters. Zaparov also vowed after the vote that he would maintain close ties with the country's main sponsor and ally, Russia. The Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe said that the integrity of the vote was weakened by Zaparov's domination of the campaign, noting that his financial and organizational resources were far greater than all other contestants. Pope Francis today changed the code of canon law to allow lay women to serve the Church in the ministries of lector and acolyte. In a letter, the Pope also explains his decision to institutionalize what is already allowed in practice, as Devin Watkins reports.
With the Motu Proprio Spiritus Domini released on Monday, Pope Francis established that the ministries of lector and acolyte are to be open to women in a stable and institutionalized form. There is nothing new about women proclaiming the Word of God during liturgical celebrations or carrying out a service at the altar as altar servers or as Eucharistic ministers. In many communities throughout the world, these practices are already authorized by local bishops. However, this has occurred without a true and proper institutional mandate, as an exception to what Pope St. Paul VI had established when, in 1972, he abolished the so-called minor orders but let only men be admitted to these ministries. However, after discernment during the last synods of bishops, Pope Francis wanted to formalize and institutionalize the presence of women at the altar. The change modifies Canon 230 of the Code of Canon Law and is a recognition that lay ministries are both fundamentally distinct and complementary to the ordained ministry. In a letter to Cardinal Ladaria, prefect of the Congregation for the Doctrine of the Faith, Pope Francis explains the theological motivations behind his decision. He says the change falls within the renewal traced out by the Second Vatican Council and responds to an urgency to rediscover the co-responsibility of all the baptized in the Church and the mission of the laity in particular. The Pope also recalls the words of St. John Paul II that the Church does not have the faculty to confer priestly ordination on women, but that non-ordained ministries are distinct. Pope Francis explains that by offering lay persons of both sexes the possibility of accessing the ministries of acolyte and lector in virtue of their participation in the priesthood of the baptized, the awareness will grow of the precious contribution that many lay persons, including women, have been offering for some time to the life and mission of the Church. He concludes that the decision to confer these offices even on women entails stability, public recognition, and a mandate on the part of the bishop. The Pope adds that it will make more effective everyone's participation in the work of evangelization. I'm Devin Watkins.
And that brings us to the end of this edition of Vatican and World News. Join us again tomorrow at this same time for more. Meanwhile, for more on these and other stories, you can visit our web portal at www.vaticannews.va. You can also like our Facebook page and follow us on Twitter. My thanks go to Gustavo Messina in studio. In the Vatican, I'm Linda Bordoni. Bye-bye.